I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on Spotlight, we're speaking with a very talented author by the name of Nick West. He is renowned for his riveting tales rooted in family lore and American history. He is bringing to life another captivating story in Light a New Fire. It is set along the Florida coastline in the 16th century. Journeying back to a time of turmoil and discovery, the author transports readers to an era where myths intertwine with reality. We're delighted to have this very talented author join us here today on Spotlight. We thank the team at Atticus Publishing for helping us put him in the spotlight today. And we ask viewers like you to support writers like him by subscribing to our channel. Nick, thanks so much for being our guest today on Spotlight.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I've been looking forward to it.
I'm looking forward to talking to you today as well, my friend. To light a new fire, let's give the folks at home the big picture. Tell them what the book is about broadly.
Well, most of my books, I call them historical fiction, but my books are really about people, about personal stories of the people who were involved in those periods of time. And this particular book starts off in about 50 years after the first European contact with the people of Central Florida. I did become interested in that period of time. I grew up on a farm here, and every spring when we would plow the fields and after the first rain, almost invariably we would find some stone arrow points in the field. And after we had found several, some of them were more crudely made than others, and I was very interested. So we took them up to the University of Florida and found out through their dating that there had been people living here for thousands of years before we came along. And so I was very fortunate. My story starts with about 50 years after the first Spanish contact, when they came through the central part of Florida. And the primary characters in the story are two Native American couples, two people. One's a young man who's a member of the Patano tribe, the village, which is in the central part of Gainesville, central part of Florida, right here in Gainesville area. And he is a trader. Most of the Native American people had traders that went to other villages and traded things that they had for things they needed from other places. This book, the young man is a trader. He goes to the East Coast to trade with the people who live there. And in the process of that trip, he met and fell in love with a young girl that lived in that village on the coast of Florida in Soloy, which someday would become St. Augustine. And so they're the two main characters of the native Florida people. And the third primary character is a cabin boy who signed on for an adventure aboard a French ship when Revolt. In the early days, France and Spain were competing for the New World, and Revolt led an expedition who landed in the Soloy area. And the young cabin boy is the third principal character. He ends up getting stranded in this part of the world, got more adventure than he had bargained for. So that's the story about those people, how their lives came together, and how things changed so dramatically and so quickly for the people who lived here in those days.
Amazing. It's an epic tale. Loved it. I also like the fact that it's set in Florida. When you think of that era, you think more of in New England, but there was a lot happening historically in the South as well, particularly Florida. I understand the tales your grandmother told you influenced another one of your books, The Great Southern Circus. Tell us a little bit about how she influenced your writing journey and how she influenced this book as well.
When I was a young child, my grandmother babysat while my mother was working. And to entertain me, they didn't have a television at the time. And in the midst of her housework to entertain me, she would tell me stories of her grandmother, who was a bareback rider in a traveling circus that toured the southeastern United States in 1858, 1859, just before the Civil War started. And she told me stories about things that had happened to her and her adventures in the circus, and how she met her husband, who would soon become my great-great-grandfather, and the tales that they enjoyed. And when my grandmother passed away, I became concerned that those stories might be lost in time for future generations of my own family. So I had always enjoyed storytelling and writing, but this gave me an opportunity. Thank goodness for the internet, because I was able to I contacted the Circus World Museum in Baraboo, Wisconsin. The circus was actually out of Portage, is where it started. And I contacted Circus World Museum, and they gave me the itineraries of the Great Southern Circus, which was the title of my first book. They had the records, they knew the other people who were involved in the circus. And so through my contacts with them, I was able to contact descendants of other performers who were in the same touring circus. And that allowed me to do a lot of research and hear a lot of stories, both reinforced that I had been told, and also added to by the other people to their point of view. So that was what I enjoyed doing, was researching and writing that first book and telling that story through the eyes of several different people who took part in it.
Absolutely. And it's such an interesting backdrop to have the circus. It's kind of a unique subculture, and to write about it and bring it to life was quite fascinating as well. Let's turn to another one of your works, the Sandspur Special, taking place in the early 20th century. Tell us a little bit about the research or the family stories that helped inform your portrayal of this pioneer family.
Sure, be glad to. Actually, at the end of the first book, I ended the book when the Civil War started. The folks at my ancestors were from Alabama area, and so they helped the circus owner get his equipment back up north, and then they came back, and half of the traveling band ended up taking up the Union cause, and the other half came back and took up arms with the South. And it was a very disturbing period of history for them, because they were always afraid they would end up against each other. The next book I wrote was about the war years. I actually, after the Amazon picked up the circus book, I started getting contact from people who had come to enjoy and like the characters that were portrayed in the first book, and asked what happened to them during the war. Well, I had to go back and research that, contacted the same people, and put all that together for what happened to them during the war. That was the second book. The circus performer who was in Florida with a circus briefly loved it, always wanted to move back to Florida, and after the war, they were poor, didn't have the money to do it. But she had always passed those dreams on to her child, who became my great-grandmother. And they ended up moving. The Sandspur Special is about when the family finally did make the move from Alabama down to near Archer, Florida, which is only about 10 miles from Gainesville. And they ended up moving down there. So the Sandspur Special was about their adventure and selling everything they had, putting everything they owned on a train, and coming to what at that time was still pretty much of a wilderness area in Florida, and getting along without running water and electricity and screen windows in their houses in Florida. So that was the third book in what I call the series of.
Tell us a little bit about how you got started in writing. Is it something you always enjoyed, or is it something you picked up later on in life?
Well, I've always enjoyed storytelling. I've always enjoyed reading, and I've been influenced by a lot of different writers in my life. But in 2010, my work was, I'm a landscape contractor here in Central Florida, and in 2010, the first economic sort of turned down. We ended up with a little bit of slack time. And I had always said that I should write all this down. And my wife, much to my advantage, told me that it was time for me to stop talking about it and do it. So So I wrote that first book in 2010 and contacted the people who were with the circus and really enjoyed that experience. And then found out a writer cannot edit their own work because I would get involved in reading the book. Whenever I would start to write again, I would go back and read the last couple of chapters to pick up the flow. And I would read right over typos and mistakes because my mind was not following the words. It was just following my line of thought. But I found out when I did send it in to be to the publisher to have the editors look it over, to much of my chagrin, I got back this edit version with all the red lines and the corrections and this, that, and the other. And plus I wrote a lot of the story in dialect of the time, which was a little bit confusing, I think, to some of the people who were doing the editing. So that was a new experience. And by that, I learned to write really with the first book. And then I've been told that as I continued to write the different books, that my style got a little more concise and better, and I certainly enjoyed it. That's the way I started.
Well, wonderful. Well, we're glad you got started. We're glad you're continuing. This latest book is called To Light a New Fire. It is written by Nick West. It is set along the coastline of Florida back in the 16th century. And it is a time of turmoil and discovery. And this very talented author transports you back to this amazing era. Nick, thanks so much for joining us here today on Spotlight.
I'm very happy to have been here, and thank you very much for having me.
Well, I enjoyed speaking with you, sir. And to the folks at home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time this time. Until next time on Spotlight.